Daddy, do janitors ever find treasure? The question floated into the cavernous lobby like a balloon that didn't belong there. Gavin Hart paused mid-mop the fluorescent lights above, casting long shadows on the polished marble floor. He glanced down at his daughter Ella, her oversized hoodie swallowing her frame a backpack shaped like a starfish bouncing on her shoulders. Only the ones who know where to look, he said, giving her a wink. Ella smiled, but her eyes kept wandering, curious alert. It was nearly midnight at Lancaster Technologies, and the silence in the building buzzed louder than any machine. Gavin had brought her along because her mom again hadn't shown up for the weekend pickup. Again. He didn't want to leave Ella alone at home, not tonight. Not with the rain falling sideways outside and her nightmares about shadows behind curtains coming back. He tapped her nose with a gloved finger. Stay close. This place is big enough to lose a whole country. She nodded solemnly, but the moment his back turned, Ella's shoes whispered across the floor. Drawn by a light coming from a half-closed hallway door, she stepped in. A faint blue glow filled the corridor beyond a strange light, not the kind from regular office fluorescence. It pulsed gently, almost like it was breathing. Inside the room was cold. Glass walls framed a pristine lab filled with things Ella couldn't name. Wires looped across whiteboards. Tubes of shimmering blue liquid sat like sleeping creatures. But it wasn't any of that made her stop breathing. It was the sketch on the glass. Drawn in dark marker, almost faded now, was a messy tangle of lines that somehow made perfect sense. A loop here, a split vector there, arrows spiraling inward like a storm caught in math. But it wasn't the science Ella noticed first. It was the way it was drawn. "That's how Grandpa draws," she whispered, stepping closer. Her fingers pressed lightly on the glass right over the looping lines. Her breath fogged the surface. The moment the words left her lips, Gavin's voice snapped behind her. "Ella," he rushed in, his heart punching his ribs. "You can't just—" But then he stopped too, because his eyes found what hers had locked on. On the glass wall beneath the sketch in small but unmistakable letters was a signature E. Hart. For a moment neither of them spoke. Gavin's chest tightened. His father, Elias Hart, had vanished 8 years ago in an explosion that no one ever fully explained. Back then, Gavin had been a sophomore in engineering school chasing his father's shadow through textbooks and project models. The official report said it was a lab malfunction. No remains, no funeral, just a government-issued envelope and a folded flag nobody knew what to do with. But that signature— He reached for the access pad beside the glass door. Locked. A red light blinked coldly at him. "What's in this room?" Ella asked, her voice no louder than breath. Gavin's eyes scanned the room. High-tech lab equipment. A whiteboard with formulas halfway erased. And on the far wall, he hadn't noticed it at first, a blueprint pinned up with magnets. The paper yellowed, the ink bleeding at the edges from humidity. He stepped back. His face paled. That blueprint. It wasn't just familiar, it was burned into his memory. When he was 10, he'd sat at the kitchen table while his father scribbled that same diagram on a napkin. He'd asked what it was, and Elias had said, "It's called the halo. If it works, it'll light up the world without burning it down." Gavin had never seen it again. Not until now. Suddenly, the hallway lights flickered, a soft beep from down the corridor. Footsteps. Gavin grabbed Ella's hand. "We're not supposed to be here." "But Daddy—" "No." His voice was firm, but not unkind. "We'll talk about it later. Let's go." They moved quickly but quietly, hearts pounding like twin drums. As they rounded the corner, Gavin looked back one last time at the sketch, the glass, the impossible name. Ella looked too. "Do you think he's still drawing somewhere?" she asked as they turned the corner into darkness. Gavin didn't answer. He couldn't. Because something inside him, a spark he thought had died the day the government car came to his door, was suddenly alive again. And it whispered the one truth he had buried for nearly a decade. His father didn't die in that explosion. Someone just wanted the world to believe he did. The storm outside had followed them home like a secret they couldn't shake. Rain clawed at the windows of their small second-floor apartment, the kind of relentless rain that made the world feel smaller, like it was closing in. Gavin sat at the kitchen table, a shoebox open in front of him, the one he hadn't touched in years. Dust still clung to the corners. Ella sat cross-legged on the carpet, her eyes locked on him with the kind of quiet intensity only a child possessed. "What are you looking for?" she asked. "Proof," Gavin murmured. He pulled out papers, sketches, old receipts, even a yellowing photograph of Elias standing next to a rusted telescope. His father's handwriting, elegant, slanted always in fountain pen, danced across the margins of every page. Notes about energy flow, magnetic compression containment fields, and one that made Gavin's heart pause, halo field test unstable under pressure. Not ready. He held it like it was made of glass. "I remember this," he whispered. He wrote this 2 days before the lab explosion. He said it wasn't safe yet, that it needed more time. Ella climbed into the chair beside him. Then why did he keep going? Gavin looked at her for a long moment before answering. Because the world doesn't always wait for safe. It waits for spectacular. He unfolded another sheet. This one, a child's drawing. Bright crayons, stars, a man with gray hair and glasses surrounded by swirls of light. "You drew this?" he asked. Ella nodded. "That's Grandpa. I dreamed it after the museum trip. I don't know how I knew his face. I just did." Gavin stared at the drawing. Elias looked exactly like he remembered him. He leaned back in his chair, running a hand over his tired face. "Halo was supposed to be different," he said. "Clean energy. Infinite energy. My dad said it would end power grids forever. No more outages, no more pollution. He called it the light that would never cast a shadow." Ella tilted her head. "But someone else is using it now." "Right, someone is," Gavin said darkly. "And either they stole it, or they got it straight from the source." That night he returned to Lancaster Technologies. He didn't bring Ella. His shift was quiet, unusually so. The kind of quiet that felt loaded. Hallways empty. Lights dimmed early. Security guards unusually alert. He kept his head down, mop in hand, the perfect ghost in blue coveralls. But fate doesn't always knock. Sometimes it glares at you across a hallway in high heels. She stood by the elevators, tall, sharp, impossible to ignore. Ariana Lancaster, CEO of Lancaster Technologies. She looked like she belonged in a courtroom more than a lab-tailored navy blazer steel in her posture and eyes that missed nothing. "You're the janitor who brought a child into my research wing," she said. "No hello, no small talk, just ice." Gavin stood straighter. "It was an accident." "So is radiation," she replied flatly, "but we still label it hazardous." He studied her, this woman who was by all accounts the mind behind Lancaster's meteoric rise in the last 5 years. And yet, something flickered in her eyes when she said research wing, like she already knew more than she was supposed to. "I saw the sketch," Gavin said quietly. Her expression didn't change. He stepped closer, voice even lower. "The one on the glass. That signature wasn't forged." She crossed her arms. "Mr. Hart, Lancaster Technologies, holds patents from over 70 independent scientists. I'm sure whatever you think you saw, I've held that blueprint in my hand since I was 10 years old he cut in. It's not just a design. It's my father's handwriting, his mind, his soul." Ariana's mouth opened to respond, but paused. Gavin's voice dropped to a razor's edge. Either someone stole from a dead man, or he's not dead. For the first time, Ariana's composure faltered. Just a blink. But he caught it. "You have 5 minutes," she said, turning on her heel. "Make your case." They met in the corner of the employee cafeteria, empty at this hour save for the humming soda machine and flickering overhead light. Gavin laid the copied sketches side by side. one from the lab, one from Elias's old notebook. She didn't touch them, but her eyes moved across every line. "You see it," Gavin said. "I see 2 drawings," she replied, "and 1 massive assumption." Gavin leaned in. "You're not denying it." "Why?" She exhaled slow, controlled, but her fingers clenched at her sides. "You said your father was Elias Hart," she asked. He nodded. She sat down across from him. "My father used to talk about a partner named Elias. They worked together on something called Project Halo. That's all I ever knew. After my father died, most of his records were sealed by the board. They said it was for security reasons. And you believed them. I believed what kept the company alive." There was a silence, the kind that felt like a scale tipping. Then Gavin pulled out the last thing in his pocket, Ella's crayon drawing. Ariana took it, her fingers pausing as she turned it over. "She drew this?" she asked softly. Gavin nodded. "She's never met him. But that's the room. That's the glass. And that man." "That's the same one from your basement lab." Ariana stared at the paper. Then she said the first honest thing all night. "I think I need to see for myself." At exactly 2:17 a.m., Ariana Lancaster sat alone in her father's old office, her hands hovering over a touchscreen interface that hadn't been used in over a decade. The room smelled like aged leather and quiet secrets, the kind that collect in mahogany drawers and behind oil portraits. She had disabled the surveillance for exactly 8 minutes. 8 minutes to find the truth. Her fingers moved quickly across the screen. Most of the files were sealed and encrypted under levels of security she had helped design, but some legacy codes still responded to her father's master clearance. One of them read Patient File 3039, location, Willow Wing, Sublevel 3. She clicked it. A loading bar pulsed. Then access granted. What popped up wasn't a medical file. It was a surveillance feed. A grainy camera time-stamped from just hours ago showed a narrow white room, sterile, silent, unnervingly calm. In the middle, seated cross-legged on the floor, was a man, thin, shoulders hunched, hair silvered into wisps, unkempt. His hands moved slowly across the glass wall in front of him, tracing invisible formulas with a dry erase marker. Again and again. Draw, erase, draw, stare, draw again. She leaned forward. He was drawing Halo, but not just pieces, the entire system, in motion, in layers. And in the top right corner of the glass, just as Gavin had said, was the looping signature she'd seen on those blueprints. E. Hart. Her pulse thudded in her ears. The man on the screen paused for a moment, dropped the marker, and looked up. He stared straight into the camera. Or maybe beyond it. Ariana's breath caught. It was him. It was really him. She didn't sleep that night. By morning, she was waiting at the edge of the maintenance parking lot where Gavin's old truck pulled in late as usual, its tailpipe coughing like a smoker. He climbed out warily. "You sure you want to be seen with the janitor who trespassed your lab? I'm sure I want to speak to the man who told me the truth," she said. In the trunk of her car, she had brought the documents her father left behind, files she had never touched. Not because she couldn't, but because she wouldn't. It was time to open them. They spread the papers across the hood of his truck, diagrams, memos, contracts from early-stage testing of Project Halo. Elias Hart's name was everywhere, but on the final licensing agreement a different name had replaced his. Same handwriting, same format, but a different signature. "Look here," Gavin said, pointing. "That H is wrong. My dad made the cross-stroke with a flick. Always did." Ariana stared at the page. This signature was traced. Poorly. "Someone erased him on paper," Gavin said, "to justify erasing him in real life." She looked at him. "If what you're saying is true, then everything we've built, the entire foundation of Lancaster Technologies, is sitting on a stolen legacy." "No," Gavin replied. "It's sitting on a stolen man." There was a long pause. Then Ariana asked softly, "Why didn't you walk away? I tried," he said. But my daughter saw something, and once a child believes in something that deeply, you don't just walk away from that. You follow it, even if it leads you into hell. Later that afternoon, they sat in the break room, an odd place for what was becoming the most dangerous conversation of both their lives. No one else was around, just the hum of vending machines and the flicker of a busted light bulb. Ariana looked exhausted but alive in a way Gavin hadn't seen before. "There's more," she said, pulling up her tablet. I dug into the personnel logs for Sublevel 3. Room 39 was officially repurposed after 2017. No patients, no entries, nothing. "But you saw him." "I did." She hesitated, then added, "My father and Elias were partners, but I think my father changed after the board took over. He became obsessed with control, with legacy. There's a chance. He agreed to keep Elias hidden. Maybe he even ordered it." Gavin didn't speak for a moment. Then, "Would you believe something for me? What my dad used to say, real science doesn't seek power. It seeks truth, even if the truth makes us smaller." Ariana stared at the floor, then said almost to herself, "If I help you, I lose everything. The board will bury me. The company will revolt. I'll be remembered as the CEO who killed Lancaster Technologies." Gavin met her gaze. Steady, honest. "If you don't help, I lose what little I have left." The words landed like a gavel. In the silence, Ariana stood, closed her tablet, and whispered almost imperceptibly, "Then I guess we both have something to lose." Back home that evening, Ella was waiting on the couch surrounded by markers and paper. She looked up with a hopeful grin. "Did you find anything?" she asked. Gavin dropped to one knee. "You were right, sweetheart. You saw something none of us did." Ella held up another drawing. This time it wasn't just a man behind glass. It was a man in a room with no door, just light and stars drawn across the top of the glass wall. In the corner she had scribbled Grandpa's still thinking. But not about science. He's thinking about us. Gavin hugged her so tightly it almost hurt, because for the first time in years he didn't feel like a janitor cleaning up other people's messes. He felt like a son, a father, and a man about to rewrite a story the world tried to erase. They called it the Willow Wing. No signs, no floor directory. Not even a keypad by the door, just a smooth steel panel in the wall on Sublevel 3, where the fluorescent lights flickered slightly slower and the silence pressed harder on your chest. Ariana's breath fogged in the stale air as she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a weathered keycard. "It belonged to my father," she said. "Pre-digital, before retina scans, before the board replaced everything with corporate paranoia." Gavin glanced around the corridor, a janitor's instinct scanning for security cameras, motion sensors, blind spots. He'd spent years cleaning hallways like this, learning their rhythms, memorizing where the light bulbs hummed differently when someone had passed. Tonight, he was counting on all of it. "You're sure this works?" he asked. "I'm sure it's the only thing left that might." She slid the card. A single green light blinked. Then a hiss as the steel door opened, and what lay beyond took Gavin's breath away. The hallway was sterile, but not inhuman. In fact, it almost looked forgotten, like a hospital wing that time had closed its eyes on. The walls were cream-colored, the tiles dulled from neglect. No digital locks, no cameras, just long-forgotten doors with embossed brass numbers. Room 39 was at the end. As they walked, Ariana's voice was barely audible. This wing was part of a secret R&D annex. My father said it was too dangerous to keep near the main labs. Too sensitive. "Sensitive enough to hold a man prisoner?" Gavin asked. She didn't answer. They stopped at the last door. No handle. Just another card reader. Ariana slid the key again. The door unlocked with a heavy clunk, but they didn't open it right away. Gavin leaned close his ear against the cold surface. Silence. Then, barely, he heard the faintest scratch. Marker on glass. He nodded once, then gently pushed the door open. The room was dim. A single fluorescent light buzzed above. The glass wall to the right stretched floor-to-ceiling its surface covered in equations loops, arrows, and stars. Elias Hart stood inside, or rather what was left of him. His body was frail thinner than Gavin remembered. His once thick silver hair had thinned to wisps and his lab coat hung on him like a curtain, but his hand moved with eerie precision tracing an incomplete formula across the glass. He didn't turn, didn't flinch, didn't even notice the door was open. "Dad," Gavin whispered. Nothing. Then Elias spoke not to them, but to the air. Magnetic compression unstable past phase 3. Recalibrate before feedback loop collapses containment field. His voice was dry, programmed, like a recording on loop. Gavin took a step forward. "Dad, it's me. It's Gavin." Still, Elias didn't respond. His hand continued moving. "Why is he like this?" Gavin asked, his voice breaking. Ariana stepped forward slowly. "I don't know. The files were redacted. Everything after 2017 is locked behind board-level clearance. They labeled him non-verbal psychosis." Gavin clenched his fists. "He's not psychotic. He's trapped." Then something caught Ariana's eye. In the top left corner of the glass wall just above the equations was a tiny drawing. Crude, childlike, a little girl with stars in her hands. Ella's drawing. No, not hers exactly, but a mirror of it. Elias had drawn her. And next to the sketch a single word. Hope. Her breath caught. "He remembers," she whispered. Some part of him still remembers. Suddenly, from down the corridor, voices. Footsteps. Security. Ariana cursed under her breath. "We have to go. Now. We can't leave him. You don't have a choice. We can't extract him yet. We need a plan, a cover, and a way to override the lockdowns. If they catch you here, they'll call it corporate espionage. Or worse." Gavin looked back one last time. Elias was still drawing. But this time... He paused. He turned his head just slightly, and for the briefest moment, half a second, his eyes flicked to Gavin. Empty, fogged, but there. And he whispered, "Starfield inversion." Then he went back to writing. It was enough. They barely made it out in time. As they exited the service stairwell, Gavin's ID badge triggered an alert at the security gate. Within minutes, HR had called. By noon, the next day, Gavin was officially terminated. The press release read, "Lancaster Technologies regrets to announce the dismissal of a night maintenance worker who violated security protocols by entering a restricted lab. The individual identified as Gavin Hart is currently under investigation for theft of proprietary designs and misconduct on company grounds. Photos leaked. A picture of him exiting the sublevel hallway. Another with his daughter from a school fundraiser. The headlines followed like vultures. Janitor caught sneaking into secret lab. Was he selling corporate secrets? Father of one. Fired for security breach at Lancaster. From mop to mayhem, who is Gavin Hart? Gavin read them in silence at the kitchen table. It was the same spot where he used to read bedtime stories to Hella. She looked up at him with tearful eyes. "Did we do something bad, Daddy?" "No, sweetheart." He cupped her face gently. "We did something brave. And sometimes the world doesn't like brave people." She nodded slowly, but a tear slipped down anyway. Gavin wiped it. "I'll fix this," he said softly. "I promise." That night he knocked on an old trailer door outside town. The air smelled like gasoline and rust. A radio played Johnny Cash somewhere in the background. The door creaked open. Frankie Morales stood there, older, heavier still with that crooked grin and missing tooth. The ex-security officer hadn't worked at Lancaster since 2017. Gavin didn't waste time. "I need to know what you saw." Frankie took one look at him, then stepped aside. Inside, the place was cluttered but warm. Photos of motorcycles, baseball trophies, and dusty security badges lined the shelf. "I always knew someone would come asking," Frankie said, pouring 2 cups of gas station coffee. Didn't think it'd be you. Gavin took the cup. You were on shift the night he disappeared. Frankie nodded. They said it was a containment breach. Sent us into lockdown protocol. But I saw two guys in suits take Elias out the back. White coats. One of them had a syringe. Gavin stiffened. You sure it was him? I was 10 feet away. He looked dazed, confused. Said something about stars that don't belong in cages. Then they put him in a chair and rolled him away. Why didn't you say anything? Frankie looked down. I had a daughter in the hospital. They paid for her treatment the next morning. I shut up. I still hate myself for it. Gavin nodded, jaw tight. I don't blame you, but I need your help now. Frankie looked him in the eye. Then let's fix what we broke. Back in the Lancaster Tower, Ariana sat across from Miles Granger in the executive boardroom. He was all charm and caution a cobra in a silk tie. You've been asking questions, Miles said, calmly swirling scotch in a crystal glass. I'm the CEO, she replied. Questions are my job. You're the CEO, he echoed, because you know when to ask and when to be silent. She didn't flinch. What happened to Elias Hart? Miles smiled. Elias had a brilliant mind. But brilliance can be dangerous when it forgets who signs the checks. You held him underground. We preserved a legacy. She stood. You preserved a lie. He leaned back, amused. Careful, Ariana. You were given this empire to protect it, not dismantle it. Choose wisely what you want your legacy to be. She stared at him for a long moment, then quietly said, Maybe I'm ready to build a new one. The worst part wasn't losing the job. It was losing his name. Gavin Hart had scrubbed floors, emptied bins, and polished windows for 10 years with quiet dignity. But now he was the man in the headlines. The ghost they turned into a scandal. A name no longer whispered with respect in the break rooms, but spat out in boardrooms and online forums like it was dirt they needed to wash away. Janitor invades lab. Claims to be son of missing scientist. He stared at the screen in silence as the morning news replayed surveillance clips, blurry footage of him walking through Lancaster's sublevels, voiceover commentary dripping with suspicion. Security breach or delusion. Lancaster Technologies remains silent. In the background, Ella sat curled on the couch, clutching her blanket, eyes wide. Daddy, she asked softly, why do they make you sound like a bad guy? He muted the TV. I guess people don't always want the truth, he said, trying to sound calm, especially when it doesn't fit the story they already believe. Ella looked at him with trembling eyes. But you didn't do anything wrong. He knelt beside her and tucked a curl behind her ear. No, sweetie. We just asked the wrong question in the wrong room. She hesitated, then whispered, Will they come for you? Gavin swallowed hard. No, he said, because I'm going to find someone who remembers how to fight for what's right, that someone lived 3 towns over and hadn't worn a badge in 8 years. Frankie Morales. He was already waiting outside when Gavin pulled up to his dusty lot. His arms crossed, a cigarette dangling from his lips, eyes shadowed with guilt and defiance. You really stirred the hornet's nest, Frankie said, tossing the butt aside. Whole city's buzzing. I need the truth, Gavin replied. Not rumors, not boardroom PR. I need the night you saw my father. Frankie opened the garage door and motioned him inside. Then, come in. Let's open some ghosts. The old security footage was stored on a rusted hard drive he'd never thrown out. Didn't have the heart, he said. Figured someday someone might come looking. The footage was grainy. Low res, but unmistakable. A stretcher. 2 men in white coats. Elias Hart, limp and blinking slowly, being wheeled down the corridor. Frankie paused the screen. Zoomed in. Elias's lips moved. Frankie played it again. Slower. Gavin leaned closer. No more glass. No more silence. Stars don't belong in cages. Gavin stared at the screen like it had punched him in the gut. He knew he whispered, even drugged. He knew they were locking him away. Frankie nodded, jaw clenched. They told us it was a biohazard evacuation, quarantine drill, but I saw no suits, no panic, just control. Why didn't you speak up? Frankie looked down ashamed. Because I had a daughter on life support. Lancaster covered the bills that same week. I stayed quiet. I cashed the check. I buried the shame. Gavin didn't judge him. How is she now? Frankie gave a sad smile. 12, stronger than me. He closed the laptop. So what's next? We get him out, Gavin said. Frankie raised an eyebrow. You got a plan? Not yet, but I've got a name that matters. And she's starting to remember why. Across town, in a boardroom that used to feel like a throne room, Ariana Lancaster stood under fluorescent lights stripped of illusion. She stared out the window at the skyline her father had once promised her, then turned as the door opened. Miles Granger walked in cool and confident as ever. You're not smiling today, he said. Neither are you. He chuckled. I suppose your janitor friend didn't go quietly. Ariana didn't blink. You destroyed a man and erased a legacy. I preserved the company. You preserved yourself. Miles sipped his coffee. And I will again, as long as you remember where the power lies. Ariana stepped closer. You think I'm scared. I think Miles said, voice low. You are exactly like your father. Brilliant, calculated, and at war with yourself. She stared at him, eyes blazing. Do you know what makes you dangerous, Miles? She said quietly. You believe truth is a currency. I believe it's a compass. He paused. Be careful, Ariana. You're not untouchable. She walked past him toward the door. Neither are you, she said without looking back. That evening, Gavin's phone buzzed. Ariana. He answered. I've reviewed everything she said. The footage, the reports, my father's private journals. Elias was never unstable. They just didn't want him speaking to the press. Gavin was quiet for a long moment. Then help me get him out. She sighed. I want to. But I'm surrounded. Miles controls the board, the legal team, even internal security. Then give me something he can't control. Silence. Then there's an old maintenance shaft, she said. Runs behind the willow wing. My father had it installed for emergency ventilation before sublevel 3 was sealed off. It connects to the old HVAC chamber. Is it guarded? No. It was decommissioned, but the access point is behind the basement server room, hidden under the false floor. I'll send you the layout. Why are you doing this? A pause. Then with emotion in her voice for the first time in years. Because I was raised to believe in giants. But it turns out the bravest person I know is 7 years old and draws stars for a man the world forgot. Gavin smiled faintly. She's got good instincts. Better than mine, Ariana said. Be ready. When the window opens, it won't stay open long. Back home, Gavin found Ella asleep on the floor, curled up next to a fresh drawing. This time, it wasn't a picture of her grandpa behind glass. It was of him standing in a field holding her hand pointing up at the night sky. On the back, she'd written, "One day we'll be under the stars together. For real." Gavin sat beside her and whispered, "We're going to bring him home. Elle." He kissed her forehead, and for the first time since this all began, he believed it. Ariana didn't cry when her father died. She didn't cry when the board made her CEO at 30 or when Forbes called her the Ice Queen of Innovation. But tonight, sitting alone in the dim glow of her father's office, surrounded by the brittle legacy he left behind, she did. She didn't sob. She wept the way people weep when they realize they've been standing in the wrong story their entire lives. The hard drives were open across the table, stacks of documents, scans of notebooks, time-stamped footage. Her father's voice preserved in old dictation logs echoing in cold audio clips. Miles is right. Elias is too idealistic. He won't let the board monetize the halo until it's perfect. There is no perfect. Containment protocol initiated. We told his son he died in the blast. Sometimes Visionaries must be silenced for progress to survive. Ariana closed her eyes. Progress isn't built on silence, she whispered. It's built on sacrifice. And I've been sacrificing the wrong people. She reached for her phone and hesitated. Then she hit record. Message to Gavin Hart. Time: 3:06 a.m. You were right. He's alive. They lied to me, too. Not just about Elias, but about everything. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect trust. But I want to help bring him home. And for once in my life, I don't want to be the woman who protects the empire. I want to be the woman who tears down its walls. By the time morning light spilled through her office windows, Ariana Lancaster had made her choice. She walked through the building like a ghost returning to haunt it. Not a queen on a throne, but a woman walking into battle armed with truth. She texted Gavin a location: cafeteria. 2nd floor, after closing, come alone. He arrived with his hood-up baseball cap low, looking like someone who used to belong here, and no longer did. They sat at a corner table. The vending machines hummed beside them. No guards, no cameras, just two people who had once stood on opposite sides of the same wall and now sat face-to-face with it cracked wide open. Ariana slid a flash drive across the table. Surveillance footage. Sublevel 3. Room 39. Voice logs, medical scans, the whole thing. Gavin picked it up without a word. I've also mapped out the entire Willow Wing, she said. Maintenance tunnels, backup power grid, timing schedules. I don't just want you to get in. I want you to get him out. He looked at her, studying her face. You're risking everything. I already lost the most important thing, she said quietly. My integrity. The board gave me a crown, but they didn't tell me it was nailed to a coffin. She looked down, then added, Your daughter Ella, what she did. That letter, that drawing. She reminded me what it means to feel something again. Not for profit, not for appearances, just for truth. Gavin blinked slowly. His voice dropped. Do you know what it cost me to come back here? She nodded. Everything. He looked at her for a long moment, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out Ella's newest drawing. Ariana took it with shaking hands. It was simple. A woman in a glass tower, lowering a rope down to a man and child in the dark. At the bottom, in a child's handwriting, some people build ladders. Some people throw ropes. Ariana closed her eyes. I'll be your rope, she said. Across town, Dr. Ruth Halberd hadn't slept. She stood in her small kitchen robe, loosely tied, stirring honey into tea that had long gone cold. The letter was still on the table, its envelope creased and wrinkled from her trembling hands. The handwriting was childish. But the words, they were arrows to the heart. Dear Dr. Ruth, I think you knew my grandpa. He taught you about physics and stars. My name is Ella, and I'm his granddaughter. They say he's sick, but I think he's just waiting for someone to believe he's still there. I believe it. I think you still do too. Love, Ella Hart. Attached was a crayon drawing of Elias sitting cross-legged behind a glass wall, stars swirling around his head like a crown. Ruth's hands trembled. She hadn't heard the name Elias Hart spoken aloud in 8 years, but his voice still echoed in her memory. Never mistake silence for absence, Ruth. Some minds just think louder in the quiet. She'd believed them when they said he was unstable. She told herself she had no power to fight the system. But now, a little girl believed more fiercely than an entire boardroom full of men. And that meant it wasn't too late. That night, Ariana received an unmarked envelope slid beneath her office door. Inside was a faded map of the facility drawn by hand, annotated in blue ink. And a single note. The tunnel still exists. The way out hasn't been sealed. You have allies in quiet places. R.H. She smiled. For the first time in years, Ariana Lancaster wasn't alone in the tower. In the Hart apartment, Gavin studied the escape plan by lamplight while Ella colored beside him. Frankie had joined them, greasy hands still stained from working on the old maintenance schematics. Security rotates every 4 hours, Gavin muttered. If we time it with the false fire drill on level 2, Frankie nodded. You'll have 11 minutes. I only need 5. Ella looked up. Is Grandpa scared? Gavin paused. I think Grandpa is waiting. For what? Gavin turned to her with a soft smile. For a voice that sounds like hope. Ella leaned closer and whispered, Then we have to be loud. Daddy. He kissed the top of her head. We will be baby. I promise. That same night, Ariana stood before the board, composed but defiant. Miles Granger sat at the head of the long table, smug and certain. You've been busy, he said. I've been awake, Ariana replied. For the first time in years. You're playing a dangerous game. I'm ending one. She slid a packet onto the table. Here are the lab logs, the medical falsifications, surveillance footage. Elias Hart was never unstable. He was silenced. Murmurs erupted around the room. Miles didn't flinch. Do you have any idea what exposing this could do? Yes, she said. It could destroy everything my father built. Everything you corrupted. You're bluffing. Ariana met his gaze without blinking. Then, call my bluff. Miles leaned back. You forget who made you. She stood tall. You forget who I am now. And in that moment, across 3 city blocks in a basement office and a child's bedroom and a forgotten wing buried beneath steel, and lies a story that had been silenced for 8 years, began to roar back to life. The envelope was small, just big enough for a folded piece of lined paper and a drawing done in crayon. Ella pressed it tightly against her chest as the city lights passed outside the car window. Her backpack was zipped. Her shoes were double-knotted. She hadn't said a word since they left the apartment. Gavin glanced at her in the rearview mirror. You okay back there, starfish? She nodded, but didn't speak. Sure you want to do this. This time she answered. Quietly but clearly. She used to know Grandpa. She just forgot. Gavin swallowed hard. Sometimes forgetting is easier than remembering the truth. Ella looked up. Her voice was firm now. Then I want her to remember the hard part. The lobby of Willow Creek Medical was quiet that morning. Too early for chaos, too late for silence. Dr. Ruth Halbert walked briskly through the corridor, clipboard tucked under one arm, glasses slightly askew. Her hair was pulled back, her lab coat wrinkled at the sleeves. She looked like someone who hadn't slept but had made peace with it. She stopped in her tracks when she saw the little girl sitting alone on the wooden bench just outside the nurse's station. Ella, small, still, but unshakable. Can I help you, sweetheart? Ruth asked gently. Ella stood holding out the envelope. This is for you, she said. It's very, very important. Ruth looked around confused. Where's your my dad's outside? Ella said. He said sometimes letters speak louder than voices. Ruth blinked, then slowly took the envelope. She opened it right there as Ella watched. Inside was a note in looping pencil script. Dear Dr. Ruth, I think you remember my grandpa. He used to teach you about the stars. They say he forgot everyone. But I don't think he forgot you. I think you were his favorite student. He drew your name on the glass next to mine. Please help us bring him back. Love, Ella Hart. Beneath it was a drawing room with glass walls and inside a man with wild hair drawing constellations across the glass. 2 figures stood outside the wall, one child, one woman, with stars in their hands. Ruth covered her mouth. A single tear slipped down. Ella reached out and touched her wrist gently. He didn't forget you, she said. Ruth knelt, eyes wet. And I won't forget him again. That night, a new envelope arrived at Ariana's penthouse, slipped under the door unmarked. Inside a map. A full architectural sketch of the Willow Wing from 20 years ago. Hand-drawn, annotated. At the bottom corner, just one line. The emergency ventilation shaft is still accessible. He deserves the sky again. R.H. Ariana closed her eyes and whispered, "We're not alone anymore." 2 hours later, she stood outside Gavin's apartment. He opened the door without a word. She handed him the map. Gavin's eyes widened as he traced the lines. She remembered, he said. "Your daughter made her remember," Ariana replied. Ella peeked out from behind the couch. "You brought the map?" she asked. Ariana knelt and smiled. "I did." Ella beamed. "Then Grandpa's coming home." Ariana looked at Gavin. "We'll need to move fast." Miles pushed up the quarterly board review. He's planning to announce a new Halo prototype next week. Once that happens, any evidence we have won't matter. He'll drown it in PR and patents. Gavin clenched his jaw. "So, we go before then. Tomorrow night. Who's on the team?" "You, Frankie, and me. Dr. Ruth will trigger a systems check at 11:45 p.m. It'll create a power loop just long enough to slip past the firewalls. And security, I'll keep them upstairs. Emergency strategy meeting, board only." Gavin raised an eyebrow. "You're going to lie to the board," Ariana gave a half smile. "No, I'm going to make them believe a lie they already want to hear." That night, Gavin tucked Ella into bed with a softness that broke his own heart. "You won't be gone too long, right?" she asked, clutching her starfish backpack. "I'll be back before you even finish dreaming." She looked up at him with eyes too old for 7 years. "If something happens to you—" He shook his head. "Nothing's going to happen. But if it does," she insisted, "promise you'll remember what I said." He kissed her forehead. "What's that?" She whispered it, barely audible. "That even stars find their way home in the dark?" Gavin held her longer than usual, because he knew. Tomorrow the night would be darker than it had ever been, but it would also be the beginning of light. Elsewhere in a quiet office, Ruth Halberd lit a candle in the corner of her bookshelf and placed a photo beside it. It was old, faded. Elias Hart in a classroom, chalk in hand, smiling as children surrounded him, eyes wide with wonder. She touched the edge of the frame. "I'm sorry I waited this long," she said softly. Then she turned out the lights and walked into the night. Because sometimes healing doesn't come from speaking louder, it comes from choosing to listen at last. And in a tower built on silence and power, Miles Granger reviewed a press release draft with his assistant. "The new Halo prototype will revolutionize clean energy," the draft read. Lancaster Technologies, under the careful guidance of its board and executive leadership, continues to honor the legacy of innovation. He smiled as he read. "Perfect," he muttered. "Make sure it's embargoed until Friday." He didn't see the storm coming, but across the city those who had lived in its shadows were finally ready, not just to survive it, but to rewrite its ending. The plan wasn't perfect, but then again, neither were the people who made it. And maybe that was the point. Because this mission, this impossible midnight miracle, wasn't born from blueprints or boardroom strategy. It was born from belief, from a little girl who drew stars on paper because no one else remembered how to look up anymore. 11:36 p.m. Sublevel 3, Lancaster Technologies. The air in the lower corridors was heavier tonight, as if the building itself knew something was coming. Gavin crouched behind a maintenance panel flashlight off, listening to the rhythmic thump of his own heartbeat. Beside him, Frankie Morales wiped sweat from his forehead with a sleeve too greasy to help. "You sure about this?" Frankie whispered. "No," Gavin said, "but I've never been more certain." Frankie raised an eyebrow. "That sentence doesn't even make sense." Gavin grinned. "It doesn't have to," he said. "It just has to work." At exactly 11:45 p.m. In a darkened control room on the building's 14th floor, Dr. Ruth Halberd inserted a thumb drive into the mainframe terminal. The screen flickered. A bypass script ran silently in the background. System load balancing. Engaged. Backup generator sync initiated. Temporary power loop 2 minutes 41 seconds. Ruth leaned back, exhaled, and whispered, "Go." Down below, Gavin and Frankie heard the click. The emergency door lock disengaged. They slipped inside like ghosts. No alarms, no cameras. Just the faint buzzing of old fluorescent lights and the echo of footsteps too soft to register. They moved fast, passing rusted pipes, vent panels, and decades-old wiring that hadn't seen a maintenance check since before Ella was born. Gavin clutched the schematic Ariana had given him like a lifeline. This way, he whispered. Room 39's just past the auxiliary junction. Frankie nodded, then paused. Wait. They both froze. Footsteps. Real ones. From the main hallway. Too close. Frankie pointed to an old storage closet and they slipped inside just as two guards walked by murmuring about a broken sensor on the west wing. Their voices faded. The hallway cleared. Gavin exhaled. Close, he muttered. Too close, Frankie agreed. They reached the final stretch. The glass door to room 39 stood before them. Behind it, thin-hunched, still drawing on the glass, was Elias Hart. Gavin stared through the glass for a heartbeat that lasted an eternity. His father looked older, smaller, but the lines of his face, the quiet intensity in his eyes as he traced equations only he understood, were unchanged. He wasn't gone. He was waiting. Gavin turned to Frankie. Ready. Frankie pulled a keycard from his pocket, the last relic of his days in uniform. Let's get your old man. Beep. Click. Hiss. The door opened. Elias didn't flinch, didn't look up. Gavin stepped inside. Dad, he said to voice cracking. No response. Elias kept drawing. Dad, it's me. It's Gavin. Still nothing. He was mumbling. Something about containment fields and inversion points. Gavin stepped closer, voice rising. You used to say the stars couldn't be owned, that they were borrowed just for a little while. You said, nothing. Gavin's throat tightened. Frankie moved toward the console. We've got 60 seconds. We need to move. Then, faint and trembling, another voice echoed down the hall. Grandpa. It wasn't part of the plan, but plans have never been stronger than love. Ella. She had come with Ariana. Hidden. Waited. And when she couldn't stay behind any longer, she ran. Now her voice echoed like thunder in the silence. Grandpa, your stars. Remember the stars you showed me? Elias stopped. The marker in his hand dropped to the floor with a soft tap. He turned. Slowly. Eyes glassy. Hollow. Lost in memory. Gavin moved toward him, but it wasn't until Elias saw the drawing in Ella's hand clutched to her chest that something cracked. She held it up. The same one she'd given to Ruth. The stars. The glass. Him. He took a step forward. Then another. Then, suddenly softly, he said, You drew Orion wrong. Ella blinked. Elias pointed with a trembling finger. The belt. It tilts slightly. Like this. Tears poured from Gavin's eyes. Dad. Elias looked at him, confused. Fragile. Gavin, he whispered. Then, like the first light of dawn, the recognition returned. Slow. Painful. But real. Gavin. Gavin caught him in his arms before he collapsed. I've got you, Gavin whispered. I never let go. Not really. They moved fast. Frankie helped Elias walk. Gavin guided Ella. Ariana stayed ahead, leading them through the utility tunnels. But as they approached the final exit, a side maintenance door just beyond the east generator wing, a red light began flashing overhead. Unauthorized exit detected. Security mobilized. Miles Granger's voice crackled through the PA system. This is Miles Granger. All security units lock down sub-level 3. Suspects are armed with stolen intellectual property and a compromised patient. Do not let them reach street access. Ariana muttered a curse. He knew. Gavin turned to her. What now? From behind them, the elevator doors dinged open. Guards. 4 of them. Armed. Gavin stepped in front of Ella. Frankie clenched his fists. But before anyone moved, before anyone could speak, a voice rang out behind them. I have executive override. Miles appeared flanked by 2 more guards. He looked at Ariana with a half-smile. "You should have stayed silent, Princess." Ariana stepped forward holding up a folder. "Board authorization," she said. "You've been suspended." Miles scoffed. "You forged it." "No," came a voice behind him. It was Ruth, and she wasn't alone. Behind her, several members of the board, silent, watching, holding identical folders. I told them everything Ruth said. They saw the footage, the logs, the patents. "You buried Elias Hart." Miles turned pale. Ariana held her ground. "You don't own this company anymore." Miles stepped forward. "And what if I don't step down?" Ariana's eyes narrowed. Then, "Step over us." Silence. Then, slowly. Miles turned and walked away. They didn't cheer. No one clapped. But when Gavin turned to Ella and whispered, "We're going home," she smiled through tears and said, "No, Daddy. We're already there." The footage played on every screen in the room. No music, no voiceover, no edits, just raw security camera feed. Elias Hart, frail and confused, pacing in a glass cell like a ghost trapped between dimensions. His hands marked the walls with equations. His eyes flicked toward the unseen, searching for the sky. Then the audio cut in. "Stars don't belong in cages." Silence. And then the second clip. This one was worse. Miles Granger's voice, low and deliberate containment protocol, was the only option. He wouldn't sell, so we kept him. Ariana stood at the podium, still, composed. The Lancaster Technologies logo glowed behind her like a witness. Board members sat at her sides, pale and tight-lipped. Reporters lined the back of the room, cameras locked on every twitch of her face. "My name is Ariana Lancaster," she began, "and I have failed." Not a murmur. Just the weight of truth settling into the floorboards. For years, I believed I was continuing a legacy of brilliance and innovation. But brilliance without integrity is nothing more than controlled fire, and I let it burn the wrong people. She took a breath. 8 years ago, Dr. Elias Hart, our co-founder, my father's partner, was not lost in a lab explosion as we were told. He was silenced, hidden, imprisoned by a faction of this company who valued profit over ethics, power over truth. Flashes from the cameras, gasps from the crowd. But Ariana didn't flinch. "I stand before you today to say this clearly: Lancaster Technologies built its foundation on stolen genius, and today we begin to give it back." Behind her, the screen shifted. Elias Hart, now in a hospital bed, sat upright beside Gavin and Ella. He was still thin, still quiet, but his eyes had returned, and his hands, trembling slightly, held a marker over a digital whiteboard. He was drawing again. The halo. Only this time, it was complete, clean, elegant, beautiful in its simplicity. The crowd watched as he finished a final arc and looked up, smiling faintly. "I never wanted a patent," he said in the recorded interview. "I wanted light." The media firestorm ignited within minutes. Headlines exploded across the country. Lancaster cover-up exposed. 8 years imprisoned, scientist returns to finish what he started. The girl who found her grandfather in a lab. Public opinion turned like a wave breaking on concrete. Former investors pulled out. Protesters gathered outside Lancaster HQ holding signs that read, "Truth is the new innovation. No more stars in cages." Miles Granger was arrested the next morning. Insider conspiracy. Unlawful detainment. Evidence tampering. Charges stacked like dominoes. He didn't resist, just looked at Ariana from the back seat of the patrol car and said, "You'll burn the whole thing down." She met his gaze through the window and replied, "Then I'll rebuild it with windows this time. So, no one gets trapped behind the glass." Meanwhile, in the quiet room of a recovery center outside the city, Elias sat under soft light watching birds outside a window that finally opened. He had stopped drawing equations for a while. Instead, he drew stars with Ella. She called them sky maps. Every morning they made a new one together, connecting dots, coloring constellations, writing names beside each shape. This one is Mommy's star. This one is the janitor's star. This one is for people who never gave up. And every time she handed him a crayon, Elias would smile. Not the sad kind, the healing kind. The kind that meant I remember now. One day, Gavin sat beside him with a folder in hand. "Dad," he said softly, "you don't have to keep working. You've done more than enough." But Elias shook his head, slid the folder toward him, and tapped the cover. Inside, the full technical blueprint of the Halo system, optimized, refined, annotated with notes in both Gavin's handwriting and his. "I didn't finish this to protect a company," Elias said. "I finished it to give you something worth carrying forward." Gavin swallowed. "What do we do with it?" Elias smiled. "We give it away." The next press release was short. Hart Lancaster Solutions announces open source licensing of Halo technology. Effective immediately, Halo will be licensed free to organizations focused on energy equity, clean power in underserved regions, and scientific education. No patents, no gatekeeping, just possibility. The world paused. Then the world applauded. Letters flooded in. From schools in Kenya, from research labs in the Philippines, from rural communities in Montana where wind turbines still stood idle. Gavin read each one with Ella, and every time she'd point at the screen and say, "That's one more place that has stars now." Weeks passed, then months. The hospital visits slowed, the headlines moved on, but the healing didn't stop. In one quiet evening, Gavin sat in a sun-drenched kitchen while Ella colored beside him and Elias sipped tea across the table. "I used to think I'd buried you," Gavin said quietly. "Grieved you." Elias looked up. "You did," he said, "and you kept going anyway. That's how I know you're stronger than me." There was a long silence. Then Gavin asked, "Do you regret it?" Elias blinked. "What?" "Choosing idealism over protection. Truth over safety." "Do you regret it?" Elias looked at Ella, now humming to herself as she drew a galaxy across the table, and he said, "If I'd stayed silent, she would have grown up in a world where lies had the last word. I'd rather be caged for truth than applauded for comfort." Gavin nodded slowly. Then, without a word, he opened the folder again. Inside, the first design draft for a new lab. The Hart Lancaster Institute of Human-Centered Science. Built not on security locks but open doors. Not on stockholders but community trust. Not on the illusion of perfection, but the raw, redeeming beauty of people who once believed the sky was unreachable and decided to rise anyway. The ribbon cutting was quiet. No press, no stage, no choreographed speeches or ceremonial flashbulbs. Just 3 folding chairs beneath a tree, a long wooden table covered in sketches and bolts, and a brass plaque nailed gently into the brickwork of the building's entrance. Hart Lancaster Solutions Building, What Matters. Together. Gavin stood beside it, thumb-tracing the edge of the letters. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, smudged with graphite and oil. Behind him, the soft whir of prototype turbines hummed like distant thunder. And beside him stood Elias. Not in a lab coat, not in a hospital gown, but in an old sweater with ink stains at the cuffs and a glint in his eyes that hadn't been there in almost a decade. Ella ran past them both laughing, chasing Frankie across the courtyard. Ruth sat on a nearby bench, sipping coffee, watching with the kind of smile you can only wear after years of silence finally lift. This place, Elias said, taking it all in, wasn't built with blueprints. Gavin glanced at him. No. No. It was built with scars, and every single one of them mattered. He pulled a folded letter from his jacket pocket. "I've been writing this. For Ella. For you. For whoever comes next." Gavin opened it and began to read, but Elias stopped him. "No. Read it to her." That evening, under a sky so clear it felt holy, Gavin sat cross-legged beside Ella on the rooftop of the new facility. The lights of the city blinked in the distance like distant thoughts, but above them the stars were bold, sharp alive. Elias stepped forward with a small notebook and handed it to Gavin. "Go on," he said. "She deserves to hear it." Gavin cleared his throat. "To my granddaughter. If you're reading this, it means the world is still spinning, and somehow against all odds you're holding a crayon. That's how the best revolutions start. I once believed the greatest thing a man could do was invent something no one had ever imagined. But I was wrong. The greatest thing a man can do is be remembered for the right reasons by the right people. For a long time I lived in the dark, a place without clocks, without windows, without the voices that remind you who you are. But even in that silence, one memory kept me tethered, a story I told once to a little girl I hadn't met yet about stars that couldn't be owned. You found me. You saved me. Not with keys or machines, but with a picture. With belief. You believed I was still drawing. You believed I could still return. Because of you, I didn't just come back to the world. I came back to myself, and now I pass the stars to you. Not because they are mine, but because you already knew what to do with them. Love, Grandpa." When Gavin finished, Ella was crying softly. Not sad tears, the kind that only come when a story closes in your heart and leaves it more open than before. She hugged her grandfather tightly. "I knew you were never gone," she whispered. And Elias, this man who had once believed he was only numbers, only theories, only formulas, whispered back, "And I knew you were the reason I'd come home." 2 weeks later, the first Halo-powered community station launched in a remote village in West Texas. No ads, no logos, just light. And then another, and another, and another. Clean energy for schoolhouses, clinics, libraries, homes that had run on diesel for too long. Towns forgotten by corporations, but not by compassion. People didn't ask who funded it. They just whispered stories about the little girl who believed her grandpa was still alive and ended up changing the world. One letter at a time. Gavin sat in his office one evening poring over expansion proposals when Ariana knocked once and stepped in. She was different now. No heels, no designer suit, just jeans, boots, and a purpose. "We have an offer from a major tech fund," she said. "They want in." He raised an eyebrow. "Control, not this time. They say they'll follow our model. Halo stays free. They'll just help build faster." He paused. "Do you trust them?" She shrugged. "I don't trust corporations. I trust people who still remember how to feel small beneath the stars." Gavin leaned back. "That's our hiring policy now. It's our blueprint," she said, smiling. That night in the common room of the facility, Gavin found Elias and Ella sitting cross-legged on the floor with a roll of butcher paper spread out before them. She was drawing again. 3 figures holding hands, one tall one, shorter one, with wild hair and glasses. Above them, instead of stars, were words. Handwritten in child's scrawl, "My family made a light that no one can steal." Gavin sat beside them. Elias looked up and said, "It's funny. I spent most of my life trying to touch the sky, but in the end, the most important constellation was sitting right here." Gavin reached out and placed his hand on the paper next to hers. Then Elias added his. 3 prints, 3 lives, intertwined. And above them, in a voice full of wonder, Ella whispered, "It's not just stars anymore. It's a new constellation." 1 year later. The walls of the new Hart Lancaster headquarters weren't made of polished marble or cold steel. They were glass floor-to-ceiling, warm with sunlight in the mornings, glowing with city lights at night. Not just transparency in architecture, but in purpose. Because here nothing was meant to be hidden anymore. And no one. On the top floor in the central conference room, Ella Hart stood barefoot on a wooden stool, arms outstretched, her fingers gripping the edge of a large canvas just slightly too big for her to lift. Gavin steadied her from behind. "You sure about this?" She nodded. "It's time." Elias, seated nearby with a soft wool blanket draped over his knees, smiled as she turned the canvas around. Gasps filled the room. Employees, students, partners, journalists, all had been invited without knowing what this moment would hold. The painting was vibrant, alive. 3 figures stood against a sky of shifting indigo and deep blue. One man, older white hair curling at his collar, one younger strong gentle hand resting protectively on the child between them. And the girl, eyes wide, head tilted toward the heavens, was reaching up holding what looked like a single line of light. A comet A star no. It was a marker, and from its tip flowed a trail of constellations, not the ones you'd find in textbooks, but names. Ruth, Frankie, Ariana, Elias, Gavin, Ella, all connected by threads of hope and courage and choice. Beneath the painting, in a hand too small to be so wise, Ella had written he was erased by the powerful. She believed what she saw. I believed what I felt. Together, we brought him home. Silence. Then someone clapped, then another, and within seconds the room erupted, not with noise but with reverence, because every person in that room had once believed truth came from power. But now they knew better. It came from a 7-year-old with a drawing. Later that night, long after the lights dimmed and the last guest had gone, Gavin stood alone in front of the glass wall where Ella's painting now hung permanently in the center of the room. He stared at the words, tears stinging his eyes. Elias joined him quietly. "She's going to change everything," Gavin said. "She already has," Elias replied. There was a pause. Then Gavin whispered, "You know, I spent years being angry at you, for disappearing, for not fighting harder, for leaving me behind." Elias didn't defend himself. He just placed a hand on his son's shoulder and said, "And I spent years thinking I didn't deserve to come back." Gavin turned. "You were wrong." Elias smiled, eyes wet. "So were you." They stood in silence, father and son, no longer haunted. Just human. Outside on the rooftop garden, Ella sat under the open sky with Ariana and Frankie. They were laughing about something, probably Frankie's stubborn refusal to use anything newer than a flip phone. "She's got that spark, you know," Ariana said, watching Ella draw constellations on the back of a napkin. Frankie grinned. "She's got more than a spark. That kid is a full-on supernova." Ella looked up at them. "Do you think stars can remember us, too?" Ariana leaned in. "I think they never forgot." Ella pointed up. "That one's Grandpa's, that one's Mommy's, and that one's for the people who never gave up even when nobody believed them." Frankie placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Then we better earn our place in the sky." As midnight approached, Gavin joined them under the stars. He carried a small silver box. Ella looked up. "What's that?" Gavin opened it slowly, revealing a folded note yellowed with time. "It's from your grandpa," he said. "Something he wrote the night after you brought him back." He passed it to her. Ella unfolded it carefully. Elias's handwriting was shaky but sure. "My stars were never in the sky. They were right here in my family." She didn't say a word. She just folded the note again, placed it back in the box, and held it close to her heart. Then she whispered the only words that mattered. Not almost. This time. Forever. And maybe, just maybe, that's what stories like this are really about. Not just science, not just secrets, but the power of love strong enough to pull someone back from the dark, the courage to speak up when the world says stay silent, and the quiet, unstoppable belief of a child who never gave up. What about you? Where are you watching from today? Whether you're in a small town or a big city under cloudy skies or clear ones, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe for more soul-stirring tales just like this one. Stories of hope, healing, and the ordinary people who do extraordinary things. And, as always, thank you for spending your time with us. Your presence here means more than you know. Until next time, keep looking up.